Did I feel like a rebel? I'm not sure whether I felt like a rebel. I felt anti-establishment, definitely. So I wasn't prepared to go and work in a large corporate and be part of a system that didn't want to change. I recognized that I wanted to try and change something from outside, because even if you went and worked for those large corporates and you had a concept that you want to change something, you can only move as fast as the slowest person in one of those organizations. And so what I had, I think more than anything else, I felt like I had a huge freedom to create. And one of the freedoms as a business is if you can generate an income, you have the luxury then to be able to create new propositions or products or new thinking that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do in any other organization.
Welcome to the 2.5 Conversations Connecting Innovators. My name is Klaus. I'm an innovation coach in Baden-Württemberg in the southwest of Germany. Innovators and creators from around the globe help each other by sharing highs and lows, their motivation and creative passions, as well as their favorite methods, tools, and ideas. The name of the podcast comes from the 2.5% innovators from Rogers' diffusion of innovation theory. Find more details, all the episodes and transcripts at the2.5.net. Enjoy the show. Juliet, thank you very much for taking the time for our conversation today.
Thank you, Klaus. It's really interesting to talk to you and have a conversation. I can't wait. I like the fact that you're coaching innovators, and I hope that what some of the things I did at Good and some of the other things I do today reflects well how people innovate and how we evolve as a society to innovate better.
Very cool. That's exactly what I'm aiming for. We want to help others to sort of learn from these experiences that people make along their way. And you have made a long way since starting in, well, not actually starting, but since starting in 1999 with Good Energy. We want to talk about that. We want to talk about your new book, where you're giving back to entrepreneurs and let them participate in what you have learned and your experiences. But back in 1999, you started Good Energy, which was called differently as a 100% renewable energy company.
Yes.
At a time when electricity came straight from the plug and mostly from fossil fuels. That straight from the plug is a German expression. How does it feel to be the dwarf with a mission on a field of established giants?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think what it always feels like is that you are facing the opposite direction. So everybody is walking that way and you're trying to walk that way. So every step you're having to try and move past somebody or persuade somebody or explain to somebody what you're doing. And every step you have people who dismiss you to begin with, who dismiss the concept, who disagree with you. But at the same time, what you have to find, and I think that was my real epiphany, because before that, I was working at government level, I was working in policy-led approaches on climate change and renewables. And it kept feeling like every document I put my heart and soul into producing for government, it would just be put on a shelf and it would go dusty. And actually, they only cared about what color the cover was. They weren't really interested what was in between the covers. One of the things about setting up your own company or setting up your own idea was that we found a bunch of people in our customers who wanted to walk in the same direction as us. And I think part of the journey that was brilliant and really inspiring, despite the fact that everybody else seemed to be going the opposite way, was that there were people who wanted to walk with us.
So you were not alone.
Yeah.
Good Energy is a company that provides renewable energy to customers. I can book energy with you. I can buy the energy for my house and car from this company. And it's a very normal thing to have today. But in 1999, that was very different. I remember that there wasn't a lot of suppliers, for example. So you had to sort of fight on different levels all the time. You had to get the good energy, and you had to find people that wanted the good energy at the same time also. Or was that like a gradual process and you were growing step by step along the way?
So there was in part a gradual process, but there was a big step initially that was quite hard, because you're right, there were very many companies, and the existing supply companies who were operating the market were actually ex-government organizations. So the government had privatized the energy sector, and they'd taken one big company called, well, I can't remember what it's called now, the Centralized Electricity Board or something like that. And they'd split it into 12 regional companies. So that was the market makeup. And then they allowed new companies to come in as well, and that was us. But getting into the market was really hard, because the regulation didn't really think of competitors, or didn't really think of innovators or startups particularly. Their mindset was large corporates. And so they found it very difficult to deal with people like us, because we were completely different and we didn't have a history, and we were new. And so that was the first tough piece, was actually getting a license to trade. And then I think the second tough piece was, you're right, finding those first generators who trusted us enough to sell us their power. Because actually we were new. Why should you, if you were a wind farm or a small hydropower station, why should you sell me your electricity? You had to be confident that I was going to pay you for it, and I was going to do something with it. And I think that was quite hard work. We found some great initial generators who really believed in what we were doing. So that really helped. And then we went out and found customers, and that wasn't easy, but it was probably easier than finding generators, to be honest.
Was it also a matter of price? Was it like more expensive in the beginning or less expensive than the regular electricity?
It was more expensive. The price, I would say it was the practicality that was most difficult to begin with. Price became more of an issue later on in the organization, when we were really trying to scale. Right at the beginning, when you have those early innovators, they're very keen, so they're tend to be less price sensitive.
I understand. You want to have something specific. That solves your need. You're basically paying everything if it solves the problem that you have. I understand. So you had different areas to work with. The regulation part, government part, you were kind of used to it in a way, because that was part of your background. And that can very well relate to that thing that producing for the drawers and for the shelves, it's just not very refreshing. It's just not a good thing on the long run. And then some customers that were with you, do you remember, you don't have to say it, but do you remember like the name or the area of your first customer?
Oh, that's a very good question. I can remember some of our business customers. So we had a bakery that was based in Norwich, I think it was, who was an organic bakery that was looking to produce organic bread with renewable electricity. That was part of what they wanted to deliver. So they were one of our first business customers. I think we also worked with the Eden Project, do you remember, in Cornwall, which is an amazing project that is a visitor centre essentially, but with these big domes built in an old mine. And they were one of our first bigger customers. So I remember a lot of our customers, yes. Maybe not so much the individual domestic customers, because you always had to be careful about quoting them. But we had a lot of support from those original customers, and they were amazing.
Is energy, you're physicist, right? Or you're a trained physicist. Yeah. So for you, energy has a different meaning than for any other normal person, let's put it that way. Sorry. But energy for you, electricity in especially, does it have like a special ring for you? A tone, a color, a smell, or something specific? Since it's you can't feel it unless it's too high and you get zapped.
Yeah. I mean, I've always thought electricity as being quite magical in some ways. So, I mean, we all have this wonderful vision, and sort of magical literature and films have become very popular. So Harry Potter, all the Harry Potterists, all the wizards and wizardry that we love to watch, and for me, electricity is very magical because it allows us to do things that we would never be able to do without it. So if you think about all the energy saving and at the how do you boil water? You potentially use an electric kettle. How do you cook food? How do you power this laptop? How do you, in some ways, I've always seen it as this extraordinary being. And you, do I smell it? No, not so much, but more see it. I mean, it's very, well, it's light, isn't it? It's almost electrical light. I see it as a kind of bluish white sort of light that allows us to be amazing, that allows us to do things we would never consider otherwise.
We're basically superheroes compared to people 200 years ago that didn't have electricity.
Yeah, exactly.
I always find that fascinating too. I was working in the mid-90s in the energy department of the German Eco Institute. It's a sort of a consulting institute as a civil whatever. It was a special purpose thing I did there. And that was one of these first steps into being aware of the theme energy and of electricity, because it is just something that doesn't have this color. Only it gets that if you sort of come with that idea that there is alternative ways to produce that when in a world where you burn fuel, for example, just to create electricity. That's just rubbish if you think about it. Okay, so it smells afterwards, after burning, when it's from fossil fuels.
I think in a way, for me, it's evolved. So there's that fundamental, what does it look like? But then you then start to think about renewable electricity. Then you start to kind of evolve a little bit more in terms of its colours and its scents. And for me, the ultimate in empowering with renewables is solar. Solar is this extraordinary technology that you can use at any scale, whether it's a household solar plant or a sort of massive 350 megawatt major power station. Solar is this extraordinary thing that can stretch in terms of its scale and condense this amazing natural resource that we have as a planet. And for me, that is the ultimate in renewable energy, and I find that very inspiring.
Same here. I can do it even smaller days. I have a pocket calculator. It's part of my life for 40 years. It still works perfect. I don't use batteries at all. It's just perfect. And right now there's all these new things where you can have windows that produce power through solar. And it's just amazing what technical innovations are happening here in this field. I'm very much with you. I think solar power gives us sort of the idea of eternity, at least spatially. If I always think of like sailboats and solar powered boats, and there you simply can go and you never need to refuel at all. I'm very much with you. At the time when you started Good Energy, did you feel also a bit like a rebel?
Did I feel like a rebel? I'm not sure whether I felt like a rebel. I felt anti-establishment, definitely. So I wasn't prepared to go and work in a large corporate and be part of a system that didn't want to change. I recognized that I wanted to try and change something from outside, because even if you went and worked for those large corporates and you had a concept that you want to change something, you can only move as fast as the slowest person in one of those organizations. And so what I had, I think more than anything else, I felt like I had a huge freedom to create. And one of the freedoms as a business is if you can generate an income, you have the luxury then to be able to create new propositions or products or new thinking that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do in any other organization.
When was the time when you felt like you had sort of transformed from or morphed from founder to entrepreneur to somebody who is sort of knows what they're doing, are in the groove and are not in panic mode all the time?
Yeah, I think probably so when we first set up, we were part of a European group. That European group ran into financial problems. So we separated ourselves out and did a management buy. And it wasn't really until I then separated off again from part of the management team and restarted the business from scratch and then crowdfunded it in about 2002. That was probably the first time that I felt that I'd gone through founding, gone through entrepreneurial, and we got to a place where actually we can now build rather than worrying about cash all the time.
I think that is a very important transformation in the life of a founder when you start something, that you don't get cocky in a way, but you get confident. Yeah. And that helps tremendously, I think, when you start to scale or when you need to scale such an operation.
Yeah, definitely. When I look back at the different times, there are different external impacts that cause you to be focused on that rather than focused on the core business. And my experience was there were quite a few, and we became more and more resilient against them, but they still took up quite a lot of management time. And that was always a problem with the energy sector. It was never stationary or simple. It was constantly changing.
That's a state I really like myself a lot, but I know it can be very tiring, especially if you don't have the resources to catch up with the change. But this work has broadened your horizon tremendously, I think. You have sort of worked with the energy sector for more than 25 years, let's put it that way. You transformed these experiences in a government sector into a company which has evolved over time. And now you're sort of out of the trenches and you start to give something back, let's put it that way. You wrote a book, which we need to talk about in a moment. You do a podcast, and you have probably various other things to do. Do you also invest now in green startups,
Yeah, I've done a little bit of investing in green startups, and I'm sort of trying to figure out, I'd like to invest more, and that's partially just the transition I'm going through at the moment. But yeah, I'd love to invest more, because I think sort of spotting some of the sort of what's really needed. So the management team is so important, sort of what the founders are like, and have they got self-awareness? Are they self-aware enough to realize where they run out of capability and they need to bring somebody else in? Has the concept actually got legs? And more, what I find with small businesses with great ideas is they forget to do the business plan. And I don't mean a cash flow plan. I mean a fundamental, what is the long-term value of this proposition and how is it going to deliver, not just the high-level concepts of it, but actually what changes, what do we need to believe to take this from where it is today to a big company?
Yeah, I see what you mean. What I also see a lot is that there is a lack of, what do I mean by that? Lots of startups lack that ability to sort of describe what they do, how they transform their lives. They might show how to transform it, but not what the transformed state is that they are bringing to people.
Yeah, and I also sometimes think that once a business goes on a journey with either a technology or a concept or an innovation, is that they may find that they end up somewhere completely different from where they originally thought they were going to be. And that the innovation is in something parallel to what they're doing, not the same piece. And that's what I find fascinating, is because that comes from interaction with marketplaces or end users who are kind of giving you the feedback to say, actually, we don't quite want that, but we'd like that bit of what you do. And I think that is a really important part of an innovation process, that you can't, how many times do you start off with a business plan or a business idea that once you start working on it, it stays the same? It just doesn't. It needs to evolve. It's like a living being that evolves, and then you figure out, actually, what is it that we're bringing that's really different? But I think that's quite difficult to do completely academically before you engage with the market.
So it's not something that you write once and put it in a drawer and forget about it. It's something you come back and review all the time and sort of work on it.
Yeah, completely.
Okay. So would you do also, I mean, you have learned a lot beyond the book, beyond the podcast. Would you also do like mentoring for startups?
So I do a bit. I'm working with 3 or 4 kind of technology startups at the moment, and I do mentoring. So it depends on the team, actually. Sometimes I find myself mentoring some of the board members. Sometimes I find myself mentoring the CEO. It kind of really depends on what transition and capability they've got within the organization. Because what you tend to find is that what they've been doing to point is fine, but they need to take the next step. And there probably needs to be some shifting in terms of the behavior of those interfaces. So yeah, I do a bit of mentoring for CEOs. I do a bit of mentoring for boards themselves. And then I can do, depending on which organization, I'll do some mentoring further down in organizations as well, which I quite enjoy because that's quite fun, sort of when you're taking somebody on a journey.
And it's always, you have all the experience, right? Because you have done all these things, you have built from scratch, you have built a company from scratch, but it's still a lot of challenges in that process, I think, because one of them is, you know how things could turn out or did turn out. You have to transform that into a way to tell that the other person so that he or she understands what you're talking about and gets a grip of that experience. And also, in the end, this person has to do their own judgment and their own decisions. And that's not up to you as a mentor. I find that very, very fascinating as a situation myself all the time.
Yeah, and I think that is the ultimate piece, is that you are not taking responsibility for decisions, and therefore you need to facilitate them to make the decision, not tell them what you think.
For these things, you are now providing with your new book, a Green Startup, a toolkit that helps to start a company, that helps with entrepreneurship, that helps with also with a broader sense of entrepreneurship. So it's very practical, I guess, on one side, and in a way very broadens the horizon, in a way to look at things that you might not have looked, which are beyond the pure business idea.
No, completely. And I think sometimes people forget that when they set up a company or when they run a company that does something very specific, they don't realize that actually their influence in the marketplace is not just their customer or their product. It's also how they run their finance team, or how they run their expenses, or how they do their HR, or how they do their marketing. All of these things have a knock-on impact, because it's like we are actors within the marketplace, and everything we do can have a knock-on impact. And that's what the book's really around. And although it's called The Green Startup, a lot of it, the practical knowledge in it, you can use at any stage in a business. It kind of prompts people to think. It tries to give some answers, but it also, I don't think it's definitive in answers. It allows people to give a framework for thinking about certain aspects of their business.
Yeah, and I think startup, at least in Germany, it's interesting. The word entrepreneur the English word entrepreneur is being used in German also. And it describes a person that is starting a company, right? But the German word for entrepreneur, which is Unternehmer, is always used for somebody that is running a company.
Yeah, okay.
With some traction, that already has some traction, so that there's a differentiation. But in English there isn't, and I think that's kind of the interesting part of what you're saying right now. It's not just for people that started. The book is also for somebody who is sort of trying to get on another level with an existing company, and I think it helps you work on the company. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's like, it's a reminder, because what I've found over the years is that lots of people think about, say, the environmental product that they produce, whether it's packaged in plastic, something that's very obvious, something you can see, but they don't think about the pension that they pay their employees and where's that invested. That's kind of like the unseen stuff behind closed doors that gets stuck in the finance department. And I think that's what the book tries to do, is say, don't forget all of these, because these have huge impacts as well.
Your whole sourcing, your whole way how to treat people, the way you communicate, you're sort of causing lots of things once you do something as an entrepreneur. And it's important to acknowledge that you can't tackle everything at the same time, right? So you have to do things one after another, but you have to start with that, let's put it that way, with that green idea. So it's encapsulated in the DNA of the company.
Yeah. And it's been really interesting. I did an article recently for Food Matters Live, which is an online magazine talking about food, and they asked me to look at the impact of the energy crisis on food cost. And so I got to speak to lots of small and medium-sized businesses, and slightly larger businesses as well, that produce or deliver food in the UK. And one of the things that they said was that they're all B Corp organizations, so they've gone through looking at every aspect of the impact of their business, And what they said is that stood them in very good stead for the energy crisis, because they'd already looked at their energy usage. They'd already looked at what their environmental impact. And so it helped them think about that in advance of what happened in terms of the external part. So I actually think a lot of the areas that we focus on in the book are almost like really good risk management, is that anybody who has a risk matrix and a larger organization should be covering everything we've got in here, because it is a risk longer term to the business.
And especially the large insurance companies know that they have to pay for a lot of images, and sort of they are transporting all these messages back into companies again. That seems like a hard thing, or a hard item to communicate, because we might be talking about something that might happen in 5 years, in 10 years, in 50 years. So why would I? And I'm very much with you, so I'm playing a bit the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Why would I think about, for example, specific green things in parentheses, if the results are not visible maybe in 50 years only? What is driving me to do something like that?
So one of the things I think is really driving people now is actually the brand of the company, and that is external as well as internal. So most customers now expect organizations to think about the environmental impact, and the risk that anybody runs is that there's an investigation on the company that they employ slave labor, or they have a massive impact on the rainforest. So you start to think about how does it impact your direct consumer facing brand? I think the next part is, how does it impact your employee brand as well, or employer brand? So in my experience, particularly in the UK, and I don't know whether that's the same for Western Europe and for Europe in overall, is that actually attracting great people is quite hard these days. And if you don't have an offering that has environment at the heart of it, you're going to struggle as time goes on, because employees want to know that their company is not undermining their future. So they want to know that the company is doing something good, and that they are considering the environmental impact, how they're recycling. And so making sure that that is visible within the organization in terms of how you run your office, for example, that you can feel it and touch it immediately as an employee. But also when you start to look at, I have a pension, and where does that pension get invested by? What happens to that? Does it get invested in coal plants, or does it get invested in renewable sites? And I think that is important. And companies who are missing that potentially are going to run into a long-term issue in terms of employee engagement and customer engagement.
Thank you very much. That was such a non-esoterical way to talk about these things. I sometimes think I do discussions around things that we only have to believe in, and you believe different than somebody else, and so on. But that's something very sensical. What's the word? Very
sensible.
Sensible, right? The way you put it right now. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Good. Yes, I mean, and I think what you've quite often, when you work through a lot of these issues, they come back to the fundamentals of running a company and how you operate. And times are changing. People don't want to buy from companies that are awful, that have dreadful track records, either from a human rights point of view or from an environmental point of view. And they also don't want to go and work for them either.
You had this fascination for electricity, for energy. Yep. You sort of moved on a bit, and you are looking at a broader level now with, say, climate change, sustainability, the things we just talked about. Let's put it green things in parentheses. So that's another level, I guess. And there's lots of more space to explore that level and work in that field also. But what would be for you like a next transition level? What's sort of the next level for you that you might aim for beyond that, or the next field you're looking into?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I look at, so climate change will always be a driver for me. It's always going to be a fundamental if I'm not impacting on climate change and what I'm doing one way or another, then I'm going to struggle to prioritize it. However, I think understanding, I'm still discovering this, to be honest, Klaus. So I haven't completely worked this out, but I think it's a combination of understanding what makes companies successful, combination of sort of people leadership, innovation, traction, etc., and figuring out where the gaps are and how do you fund organizations to do that, and what because we all talk about the valley of death, we all talk about the innovation gap and etc., but I think I want to spend more time thinking about how do we accelerate innovation where it's needed and make sure that we see that coming through in marketplaces, because innovation is not just about a company not being able to find enough money. It's about getting the right people. It's about making sure that actually we've got research and innovation going on at university level, at pure research level, that can feed that machine as well. So investment is going in there. It also impacts on what we've already got in place. So the infrastructure, whether it's the financial infrastructure or the physical infrastructure, impacts on our capability to move at pace on innovation. And then obviously the customers, and how do we make sure customers know that they're getting what they think they're buying? So the whole greenwashing concept. And I guess for me, sort of to be able to move at pace within all of that, you kind of need all of those things. Mm. And I'm not, and I'm still figuring out how do I, what are we really missing to get things moving faster? Because at the moment, innovation's moving, but I think we need to move faster if we're going to hit all our climate change targets. And then how do we get consumers engaged that really, really make a difference? And so I guess it's something around there that I'm thinking around.
So this has, what I'm hearing right now is sort of a mixture of, or maybe the Venn diagram of, let's put it that way, companies, products, requirements for green, but also something very social that is based, because we're talking about people, about change in people and change in behavior.
Yeah, and I think that change in behavior piece is absolutely key to what we need to do next.
I was happy to see that and kind of frustrated at the same time when I saw that nowadays more than 90% of all Germans are using the internet several times a week. It doesn't matter which device and so on, but that's happening right now. So basically everybody is using the internet, let's put it that way. But they said in that study that it took about 25 years. We have the internet the World Wide Web started in around 1994, 1995, 97 to be broadly used or being broadly usable. And so that's 25 years for such a very useful thing where I see the result right away. And it took a generation. And what we are talking about is something that I, as a person, might not even feel the impact at all, but still have to do some sort of massive behavioral change. And this is sort of a frustrating thing if you compare that to that other statistics I just talked about. It will take generations, but it must not.
Yes, and I think it's a really important point you make, is that what will it take? So, for example, let's take a look at the data on internet interaction. I'm sure there's a curve, isn't there, where you get, and at what point on that curve is it enough to have engaged, and which parts of that curve can you accelerate? Because you won't be able to accelerate it all. So where would you focus your acceleration? And therefore, I think it's the same with the technologies that we're talking about and the behavioral change, is that you can't impact everybody, because there's no way you've got a universal message that will impact everybody in society. However, there are parts of society that probably have more capability and are more understanding of what the outcome could be. And so you need to focus on those areas, because you'll get bigger response for the investment you make out of those areas. And one of the challenges for energy has always been is that we've got this conflict between fuel poverty and climate change. My sense has always been you've got to separate the two. You've got to focus on climate change, and you've got to focus on poverty, not just fuel poverty, full stop. And you treat them with different policy instruments. But we've always conflated the two and put them in conflict. And therefore, that has caused us, I think that slowed us down so much. Because if you were focusing on behavioral change in the non-fuel poor, right, the fuel rich, let's call them, you would use different strategies than you would in the fuel poor. And part of that is incentivize investment, and potentially you get much more response out of that sector if you get it right, and you get a bigger impact on climate change. That doesn't mean you don't fix the fuel poor, but you do it in a different way. And that's been my concern, is that when we've looked at it from a policy level, we get these competing areas and we get bad policy making. If you want to promote behavioral change, you have to understand the people you are trying to change. And then you have to put the structure in place around them that makes them feel like. So there's a whole part of middle England, and I'm sure Germany is the same, where tax incentives are very effective, because people who think they can save on tax do a lot of things to save on tax. And therefore, that would work very well sort of for middle Germany, middle England, to improve their usage of energy one way or another. And then you focus on the fuel poor, and then you focus on everything else. So you've got kind of like three sectors that you think about how you're going to address, and you don't try and address them all in the same way.
So are you saying it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy that leads to results, but it's sort of a focused precision measures that might contradict sort of with each other a bit, but that needs to be solved at the time when it's occurring?
Completely. I mean, if you think about it, if you were selling T-shirts and you worked out that your audience was 25 to 40 for that particular T-shirt, whatever it is, would you try and sell it to the over 80s as well? The answer is no, you wouldn't, because they'll want something else. They probably want a jumper, not a T-shirt. So you're selling the wrong product to the wrong place. And so if we think about it in that context, rather than trying to address everybody in the same way, people are not the same. That is absolutely what we know. And therefore, trying to talk to them in the same language doesn't work.
I think that's a very interesting perspective, because from what I'm used to, at least in Germany, is that we want to always have the one size fits all solution for everybody. And then we are getting into compromises. Politics are compromises, that's normal, but compromises that compromise the whole result or the whole vision and sort of dwarf the vision essentially.
Yeah. And also one of the things I think the Ukrainian crisis has brought into sharp relief is that, let's say you focused it on people who could afford to make changes and reduce their energy usage because they're using a lot of energy already. By reducing demand in the UK, and I don't know what the figures were like in Germany, but over COVID, energy demand dropped by 10, 11%. Overall prices crashed by 50%. So actually, if you get that part of the market to reduce their energy usage, you can have a positive impact on the fuel pool, because you'll bring prices. Because what we saw, the wholesale market, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in Germany, all the wholesale markets crashed at the beginning of COVID. At the beginning of the pandemic, when everybody went home, wholesale markets dropped. Now, it didn't come through in energy prices to consumers because everybody bought all their energy already. But that's what happened physically in the marketplace.
What I find very, very refreshing right now is that you talk about measures in politics using some yardstick from companies, from a different sector. And I think that helps a lot to sort of stay focused. If you say, okay, we want to focus that on a target group, we want to tackle things differently, and so we don't have that one solution for everything. I think that's a very cool approach. I like that a lot. In terms of, it's going back to that group that we need to target, because we can't target everybody at the same time. For The podcast is called the 2.5 after that diffusion of innovation theory, which discriminates between the 2.5 innovators and the early adopters and the early majority and late majority and the laggards. Let's put it easily in the energy sector, in the electricity sector. Which people do we need to address here the most? Are we already in the majority part, or is it still addressing the early adopters?
I think you need to be beyond the early adopters, because the early adopters will give you something, but they'll give you small amounts. And they also won't be sustained on a longer process. So, for example, let's say you take the potential that domestic households can change their behavior and impact on the overall energy grid in terms of stability. And what you find is that your early adopters are people who are very happy to have a spreadsheet and almost become an energy trader in their house. So they get really into it. They're very into the data. They love the data all over it. But you're never going to be able to scale that. And it will have an impact, but it'll be very small. For me, the area you want to focus on is the next stage, where you get this kind of uplift beyond early adopters, where it's becoming mainstream. It's still relatively early, but it's becoming mainstream. You can get much bigger numbers involved. And that is where it gets really exciting, because you can have much bigger shifts and behavioral changes on systems.
Especially in that energy market or with energy innovations, we see that the raw technology is here. We talked about solar. I mean, solar panels are just normal. They are affordable. They don't smell. They are quiet and so on. You can put them on your roof and they produce energy. So the raw technology is available. It works. You can trust it and stuff like that. What is the challenge here for people to sort of better interact with that technology so that they can use it the best, or maybe control it in their best interest, or put it to best use?
I think this is the evolution we're now going through, is this translating the technology to be used by the masses in a much more effective way. So I have a heat pump, the human interface of the heat pump. I have to go back to school every time I try and read it. It is not intuitive. I need to refer to the instructions every time, because I'm not using it all the time, but it doesn't help me reprogram it. It's the same with any timer as well. Anything where you have to put a time zone on something. The interface is still really clunky. If you get enthusiastic enough, then you'll do it. But if you don't, if it becomes hard, then you stop and you're not using the technology properly. And I think that is going to be, the iPhone is something that a 3-year-old can pick up and intuitively use, which has benefits and disadvantages. Obviously, we don't want our children using every technology. But we should be thinking about how we design the consumer interface with these types of technologies, whether it's solar panels, electric vehicle charging points, EV heating. All of those areas need to be able to interconnect and just work seamlessly for us in the way we want them to work.
Especially if you have, for example, solar panels, a battery, a car, a heat pump, and all these things that need to work together in the best way for my use.
Or for the use of the system. So there's 2 ways they should be operating. 1, to give me what I want primarily, and then 2, can they also support the system to make sure we keep the cost down nationally as well?
True. The idea of sort of combining all these small trickling input of my power, individual power into the big net also, and combine that into something new is also something that needs interfaces.
Completely. And that's, for me, the really exciting next stage. We've got to see that innovation shift now.
We will be providing all the links to your book, podcast, Good Energy, and all these things in the show notes. Thank you very much, Juliet, for taking the time for this conversation. It was really helpful for me. I learned a lot, and good luck with these getting into next levels and exploring next levels.
Thank you, Klaus. I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed hearing a very different perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the 2.5 Conversations Connecting Innovators. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. A transcript of this episode and additional information is also available. The link is in the show notes. My name is Klaus. I'm an innovation coach in Baden-Württemberg in the southwest of Germany. This is the 2.5.